Hello and welcome. In this video, I'm going to be talking about the Prettier code formatter and setting it up locally in your in a VS Code editor. So for those that don't know, Prettier is a opinionated code formatter. And what does that mean? It means it will on save or on format, it'll change your code. It'll indent in certain areas. It will change the double quotation marks to single quotes. It will add spaces where they're missing or subtract spaces where they shouldn't be. And it's great to have that regularity amongst all your files, and I would highly recommend it. But so in this video, I'm going to be talking about using it for local folders and versus global folders or global folder. And there are pros and cons to both, but for the local, some of the pros are you can use different settings for different projects. Now, when you're working with different teams, you have different projects you're taking on. Each project might have different settings, and some people might want 100 images or 100 pixels wide for their view. Someone else might want 60, and you can add a local Prettier file to adjust accordingly. Prettier is not specific to VS Code, but in this video I'm going to be using VS Code just because that's the editor that I use. But you could use Sublime Text or I don't know the other ones. And a con to setting up locally each time is that you have to set it up locally each time, whereas a global file you can just make it once and leave it. Also, I wanted to mention that when you go to a different company or you get a new computer or etc., all of your settings in VS Code they're gonna be gone. But if you set up a Prettier file, you can just take that file and reuse it on a different computer or a different system. So Prettier, setting up Prettier in VS Code, there's a couple ways to use it. First of all, you want to actually download the extension. So if you go to extensions, Prettier, you type it in. I already have it installed, but you would install it. And then if you go to your code settings and you type in Prettier, you'll actually see that in VS Code the Prettier extension has settings, and now these settings in here are actually settings for VS Code. And what that means is there's not like an actual file that you can take with you. These are only for VS Code. So if you were to use a new editor, you would lose all of these settings basically. Now there aren't too many settings, but so it's not like crazy to set up, but it's just nice to know what your settings were and have always been. So going through these, I'm not going to discuss what each one of these does, but I just want to touch on the important couple settings. So if you scroll down and if you go to, it's called Prettier Require Config. Now what a require config does is it makes it, in order to use the Prettier formatting, it requires a configuration file. And now for me, if you look over here, this is my folder, and then within my folder I have two files, index and about. And then I also have some setting files. So this is my Prettier config file. This is my configuration. So if you see some of these settings, print width, tab width, what have you, all of these are the same within the VS Code extension settings. But the difference is I'm using an actual, so you can see the image of Prettier extension or config extension or config file. And in around here, and so I would change the settings in here actually, and these settings would override the VS Code settings. Hopefully this is making sense. So you have VS Code, you download the extension. VS Code has its own Prettier settings, but if you have a Prettier config file, those settings will override the settings within the VS Code. So to show that, I'm going to give a quick example. See how the spacing, okay, if I were to save, I don't have that on save. Also, it's important to note that there's a setting called, in your editor, format on save. And this is based on the editor, not on any extensions. So if you go to settings and you type in format on save, and you can see I have mine checked, which means when I save, my code will be formatted, basically. So I have that on. Now if I go back to, so I have to go back to my settings, type in Prettier. If I go down to require config. Okay, so that is on, checked. If I go here, okay, so everything in here should change to single quotes, double spaced, and it should format it when I save it. But I have a setting, okay. Which, if you saw that right there, I saved it, and everything went into place. That was the Prettier extension at work. So if I undo it, so this is longer than, it's longer than 80 print width. But when I save, see if I make this a double. Oh, it's not working. But when I save that, this changes to 80. So if I were to change this to 50, it would get even skinnier. And that's what Prettier is doing, basically. And if I, tab, if I tab twice, like this is, so this is 4 instead of the setting that I have is 2. So if I change it to 4, save, and now everything is tabbed more, basically. And okay, so these are the settings that you can set up. So if you go back to the folder, so now say this gets removed for some reason. Say you don't have that, right? So this isn't going to work because there's no, I have the setting that it requires a config file. So we just deleted that config file. And what's going to happen if it's going to look locally in this local folder, if it doesn't see one, it's going to look to its parent folder, all the way to the global folder. Now, I don't have any. I turned mine off because in the next video I'm going to talk about setting up the global folder. But for this video, locally, there's nothing there. So it's not going to work. But if I uncheck this, and I don't require that file, it should now work, which it just did. That was on save. So I click save, I'm undoing it, and indent, click save, and it formats. Now, where are these settings coming from then? Like I said earlier, these are from the VS Code settings. So the VS Code makes it easy to change settings. For those people who don't want to go in here, this looks very confusing. They don't want to mess with any of this. They just want to have a drop down. It's very easy to use. Add some checkboxes. So this right here. So if I change it to 200, and when I save, this text is going to double in size, basically. If I click save, and it does. So now that's 200 print width wide. So those settings are built within the VS Code. Dun, dun. Okay. So that is that pretty much sums up the local file. And so if I put in this file, I'll put this file back. Now these settings will override. Okay, so that just went back. Just for clarification, this is your local Prettier file in VS Code. Now you can add a local VS Code settings file, which is what I've done. And instead of using the settings built in with so this is VS Code settings. Instead of using these, so if I'm going to discuss about format on save. And when you format on save, it enables, or it activates rather, the Prettier extension. So if I do format on save, as you can see, I have it enabled. But what is cool, if you add your own VS Code settings, settings.json, you can set your settings for your formatter, in this case Prettier, per file type. So this is HTML, and I have two HTML files. As you can see, it's set to true. This is the global. So if there was no HTML, it would also be true. But let's say only for CSS, because I like to minimize my CSS, I don't want it to change my code when I save. So I have that set to false. In JavaScript, I want it to work. JSON, I don't touch. Don't touch. Now if I change the HTML, if I change this to false, and if I do this, what do you think will happen when I save? Nothing should happen. It should stay the same, which I just saved, and nothing happened. Which is the setting within VS Code. So in this little text right here, that is the Prettier extension in VS Code. That's all that is. You're setting the default formatter. There are other formatters you can use, and you can just set it right here. So the on save doesn't work, but say you have a folder and you turn off on save option, and you want to just format one file and like not save it. You just want to see what it looks like. You can on a Mac, you can hold the option shift and click F, and it'll format it for you. So this, and I'm just clicking option shift F. There you go. And then you can save. I believe you can find that in the settings here. It's like keyboard shortcuts. So if I go to format, yeah, right here. No, right here. Format document. That's how I got that. So yeah, so that's that. Hopefully that clears things up for the local Prettier file. I know I was having some trouble. I was like, why do I have this extension in VS Code? And I'm trying to change the settings within here, but they're not working. That's because in the folder I was working with, I had my own Prettier config file made, and it was overriding the files or the settings I had within VS Code. And I highly recommend creating a Prettier config file. I would recommend doing one global and then also creating one per project or per folder. In that way, you'll have those settings wherever you go, or you have a better understanding, and you're not tied down to using VS Code for your formatting. Okay, so that will do it for this video. On my next video, I'm going to talk about the Prettier file on a global or within a global folder or a global location. Okay, thank you for watching. Until next time.